So we just finished Ezra. And as you know, it tells the story of three groups of Jews that returned to Jerusalem after the 70 years of captivity in Babylon that began when Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon invaded Judah. And if you remember, I told you there was a 58-year interval between chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7. Chapter 7, if you remember, that began where the second group was returning. That was telling the story of that second group of Jews. And they're also led by Ezra, but the record is silent as to what was happening in Jerusalem during that time. But in another book, the biblical spotlight shifts to the capital of Persia, which is modern-day Iran. Remember, early 1900s, it was 1902, Persia changed its name to Iran. And it shifts to the king that replaces Darius, and it's his son, Xerxes, also called Ahasuerus. And he gets angry with his queen. He banishes her from his kingdom, replaces her with the most stunning woman in the kingdom. And her Jewish name was Hadassah. The king gave her a new name, a Persian name for star, which was simply a star, where we get Esther. And again, at that time, most Jews were living outside of Jerusalem. Many were living in Persia. And many of them were deciding if they want to go back to Jerusalem. And it was in the middle of that 58-year interval between the first and the second returns that a serious threat to their very survival, the survival of the Jewish people, developed. And you know her story in the Book of Esther, and how she saved her people from a literal Holocaust. I want you simply to consider, there would have been no second or third return of Jews if it wasn't for what happened in Esther. If there was no Esther, there would be no second or third return of Jews, because all the Jews would have been killed. And it's because God placed her where he did. And it was just after Esther saved her people that the Jews began to celebrate a new celebration, this annual celebration. They called it Purim. And it's the celebration of how God saved the Jewish people through Esther. And so tonight, we're going to go to the Book of Esther, because that's where we need to go before we go to Nehemiah. And it's found after Nehemiah, but chronologically, that's not where it belongs. Okay? And so turn your Bibles, if you haven't already, to right after Nehemiah, Ezra. Nehemiah, Esther. And in our English Bibles, the first 17 books tell the story of the Hebrew nation. Esther is the 17th book. Okay? It's the final book that is in the order that we find in our English versions. And then there's 5 books that follow this. We call it the poetry of the nation. And then the last 17 are all prophecies to the nation. So all the prophets are the last 17. So 17, 5, and 17. This story takes place somewhere around the year 357 BC. All right? Chapter 1, verse 1. And I love this book, and I'm excited to go through it with you. Somebody please read the first 9 verses nice and loud.
Now it came to pass in the days of Arius, this was the Arius who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia.
So let me pause right there. So again, same king, Xerxes, also known as Ahasuerus king, and however you want to try to pronounce that, is that guy, okay? So, but did you catch that? 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. Wow. All right, this guy, he was the emperor of the world at the time. Okay, go ahead.
In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, that in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Medes, the nobles, and the princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty, for many days, 180 days in all. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the king, of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of an alabaster, turquoise, and white and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, so the king ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus.
Okay. You got the image of what this looks like. Did you catch all that? Yeah. Okay. So the king, he sits on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. It's the 3rd year of his reign, and he gives this big banquet for all of his officials, all of his ministers. The army of Persia and of the Medes, all the nobles, the governors of all the provinces, and I mean, everybody's there. The armies are there. Now, all the armies aren't with him in his throne room, let's say, but the high brass is, okay? And this is all happening there while he displayed the great wealth of his kingdom, right? For how long?
6 months.
Okay, 180 days in all, it says. Now, he's feeding everybody. This guy's got bank. And this is 180 days. It is all expenses paid, time to just hang out with the king. Okay, now Donald Trump would have that kind of money.
Not anymore.
I was thinking about it.
I think he still does. But he'd have that kind of thing. Think of an Elon Musk. What if he was in charge? Oh, no problem. It's nothing. It's coffee money. Okay. So when those days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel, both great and small, a banquet lasting 7 days. So then everybody in the capital city gets to have a 7-day banquet. Holy cow! This guy is putting it on. We got the image of what this must have looked like, and it says both great and small. So we're talking. It's not just the upper echelons. It's not just the wealthier or the well-to-do, maybe the local, those in local government. Everybody, the poorest of the poor, he's just taking everybody in, buffing them out, giving them a wonderful week paid vacation at the capital. Okay. And you caught what the decorations look like. Place is just looking marvelous. All these beautiful cups, golden goblets. Drinking was by verse 8 flagons without restraint. Those were bigger than beer steins. A flagon, got it? Drinking without restraint. So the alcohol is flowing. And he gave orders to all the officials of his palace to do what? To do as each desired. Knock yourselves out. Here's a blank check for yourself and for anybody you want to take care of. Golly! Verse 9, his wife, the queen, what does she do? So she puts on a big feast just for the ladies. Okay, that's nice. Verse 10, 11, and 12, somebody.
On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Meshullam, Biztha, and Harbona, Bigtha, and Abigatha, and Zethar, and the Carcas, and the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princesses her beauty, for she was fair to look upon. But Vashti, Queen Vashti, refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him.
All right, so these verses tell us that the king has had way too much to drink, and he orders his attendants to go get his wife. That's Queen Vashti. And for her to come out and stand in the middle of everybody so that they could see how good she looked, because she was good looking. And it's as if for 180 days he was showing everybody the beauty of his capital, his castle, his furniture, his floor coverings, even his drinkware. And then he has saved the best for last. So he's actually, this infers he's in a room full of men. It's just men. And he tells them, wait till you see this. But word comes back to the king that Queen Vashti doesn't want to come out and be oogled at by a bunch of drunk men. And it says that King Xerxes became enraged and his anger burned within him. Verses 13 to 20, somebody.
Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew the law and justice, those closest to him being Karshina, Shethar, Admatha,
John, Paul, George.
yeah, that's right, Sue, Sally, Jennifer, all that. 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom. What shall we do to Queen Vashti, according to the law, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus, brought to her by the eunuchs? And Nebuchadnezzar answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princesses and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. This very day the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that
Pay attention.
Huh?
Keep going. Pay attention, everybody.
Will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. One more verse. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. Can we keep going?
Sure, take it to the end.
When the king's decree, which he will make, is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Nebuchadnezzar. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house, and speak in the language of his own people.
Holy cow. All right, so verses 13 to 20 tells us the king consults with all of his nobles. Okay? And they say, verse 18, this very day the noble ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will rebel against the king's officials, and there will be no end of contempt and wrath. In other words, when word of this gets out, it's a matter of time until all of our wives will start thinking for themselves too.
Trouble.
Got it? Verse 21, 22. Okay, look at 22. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script. Remember, this guy's looking from India to Ethiopia, north and south, everything in between. Guess how many languages? Okay, so this letter of his, is going out all over the place. Okay, in the ancient world, imagine how big that is. This actually happened. Yes, Amy.
Well, back to verse 11.
Mm-hmm.
I listened to somebody who did some research on this, and it was wearing only her crown.
Oh,
Right.
oh, that's real good.
Have you heard that before?
Yeah.
It is, I have heard that, can't take a bullet for it.
Yeah.
But you go
Could
to verse 8.
Could be, yeah. So,
Go to verse 8 and it says, according to every man's pleasure.
yeah,
And
so,
in comes the queen.
yeah, so, yeah, if she wasn't buck naked except for the crown, she, might have had some see-through lingerie-ish something, okay? But, here's the thing. Verse 22, so he sends letters all over the place, to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, to every people in its own language, declaring that every man should be master in his own house. And guess what? It's still like that today in the same region. In most of the Middle East and in India, it is the same today. Okay? So I want you to know something. It's not that it was never like that, but it became codified. And I will tell you, you just read something that shook history. What was decided there still lasts today. The impact of that still lasts. I even take you back again to Genesis chapter 3 to the punishment narrative where God's doling out the punishment, right? To the snake, to Adam, to Eve. And it's when he says to Eve, and your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. And I told you what that meant. In the Hebrew language, there's something like, there's quotes that close, and it's a side note that God says, by the way, her punishment would be increased pain in childbirth. And then he says, this was not God's plan. He says, but because of this fracture now, he's going to take advantage of his size and rule over you. He's stronger than you. It's just what he's going to do. And that's been how it's been throughout human history in most of the world. Sad. Okay, so hope there's questions coming up.
This was the biggest, let's nip this in the bud letter.
Oh, absolutely.
That ever went out.
We're going to nip this in the bud. Yeah, before it gets worse, think about it. They're threatening. Now that should... Does that give you an insight at all into something about, the male thinking sometimes?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Who was that over there saying yes?
That's Amy, that's troublemaker.
Okay, there's guys like this. Okay, and then there's guys not like this.
Doesn't it make you wonder, though, that this letter that went to all the provinces, all the people, declaring that every man should be the master of his household, and he's bringing about by a letter what he couldn't do himself? He ordered his wife to show up, and she said no. And now there's a letter that says, all right, wives, you're going to do what your husband tells you. What if they say no?
But he is.
It's just a letter. He couldn't do it in person.
He is doing. He's banned.
And the problem is, when there's this legal precedent now, men would have some sort of a legal recourse to make sure that he's the head of the house, and she has to obey everything he says, and
You have to do it.
Yeah. If you go to an Islamic republic, and they're going to cut your ears, your nose off, and everything because you don't obey them. It's horrific. There's these honor killings that go. It's from hell. But anyway, because I want to remind you again, this kind of thing, this is from the pit of hell.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Yep.
This should not happen with the daughters of the king of the universe and the sons of the kings of the universe. We need to love each other. It's co-dominion we're called to have and serve the Lord, right? And bless and honor God in our male and femaleness.
Amen.
So, chapter 2, look here, first 4 verses. After these things, when the anger of the king abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint commissioners in all the provinces of the kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in the citadel of Susa under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetic treatments be given them, and let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. And this pleased the king, and he did so. So how many girls are we looking at this point in the story?
Thousands.
All the best looking girls from every country in this massive kingdom.
What if they didn't want to go?
They could not refuse. Could not refuse.
They had to go sleep.
They were, wait, you wait. Here we go.
You weren't sleeping.
Yeah.
Verse 5 and 6, somebody.
In Shushan, the citadel, where there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jehoiakim, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away.
All right, that tells us that Mordecai, this also we see this guy enter the story. He's going to be a major player with Esther, right? Mm-hmm. He's the great-great-grandson of a Jewish captive. Back when Nebuchadnezzar took, the people of Judah captive and brought them back to Babylon. Mordecai appears to have been born in Persia. Okay, verse 7, 8, let's go 7 to 14, somebody.
And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it was, when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan the citadel, under the custody of Hegai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace into the care of Hegai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her in the king's palace. And he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Each young woman's turn came to go to the king Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months of preparation according to the regulations for the women, for thus were the days of their preparation apportioned: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. In the evening she went in, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashgaz, whatever his name is, the king's eunuch, who kept the concubines. She would not go to the king again unless the king delighted in her and called her by name.
Holy cow. Okay. What we just read was that the king takes the virginity of a different girl night after night. And these girls leave the king's bedroom, and in the morning, when they leave, they are sent to a different harem, and no longer the harem of the virgins, but the used car lot. Okay? And they will never get married to anyone. Not the king or any man. They've been used once, and they go to the used car lot. In case he wants just some variety somewhere down the road, a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, she will always be. Do you understand this? This is, it's horrific, right? It's horrific. By the way, her name Hadassah in Hebrew is myrtle, like the myrtle tree. Okay, so that's her name. So Esther, she's been in the harem of the virgins, and let's call it a day spa, for at least a whole year. And verses 15 to 18 tells us that in the 10th month, in the 7th year of his reign, that was when it was Esther's turn to be raped by the king. Now, the Bible doesn't say she was raped by him, but that's what it was. Okay? Or do you think Esther liked the idea of having relations with this arrogant narcissist that she's never seen who sleeps with a different girl every night. And I say girl because it says they were virgins, and in that day, virgins, they were teenagers. Most girls at the time were married by 16. So these girls were 16 and under. He's raping them. Okay? That's what he's doing. Esther is probably 15, 16 at the most when she meets the king. And as the story goes, the king's going to love her more than all the other virgins he'd known, and he's going to make her queen. Now, how old is Xerxes? Here's what we know. Number one, I want to remind you, he is the son of King Darius.
Oh, Darius.
Good old Darius. He's the son of Darius. And from biblical and extra-biblical texts, it appears that he was born in 518 BC. He became king of Persia in about 485 BC at the age of 33. He marries Esther 479 BC when he was about 40. He's about 40. He's 15 or 16. Okay? He ends up being assassinated in about 465 BC when he was 53. Okay? But in verse 21 of chapter 2, something interesting takes place. So somebody read 21 to 23, please.
In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on the king. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king.
Maybe we skip like 15 through wherever Jewish.
Oh, yeah, you know, I'm sorry, wait. Sorry, sir. Yeah. I want you to go,
Back to 15.
where did I stop you?
15 is where we pick it up. 14 was the last thing that we read before Jewish.
Sorry. Okay, 15. When the term came for Esther, daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter. This is, very special. This is why Mordecai enters the picture. To go into the king, she asked for nothing except for Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now, Esther was admired by all who saw her. When Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebet, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the other women, for all the virgins. She won his favor and devotion, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great banquet to all of his officials and ministers, called Esther's Banquet. He also granted a holiday to the provinces and gave gifts with royal liberality. Interesting.
He likes to party.
Say it again.
He likes to party.
He likes to party. Yeah, it is. It is. Something else, when you read about all the treatments and the oil and the whole year, what they did, they took these women, they had to undergo this thing a whole year. I mean, talk about soften up your skin, the best lotions and whatever. Think about this. Best cosmetics of the day to make this female her best before she's given to the king and then he sleeps with her. And again, an untold number of women. Now, sorry, I looked ahead of my notes and we jumped somewhere else. Did we already go 19?
No, I think. Yeah, you started at 21, didn't you?
When the virgins were being gathered together, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. That tells you, by the way, if he's at the king's gate, and it says many times we'll find him at the king's gate, which means he had some sort of nobility. The gate, we've talked about this before, that's where business transactions are taking place and stuff like that. And if you were at the gate, that you might say that's where the city of commerce was, where the offices were, city councils there. That's just where all these deals and whatnot are made. Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her kindred or her people as Mordecai charged her. For Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. So she's like a good daughter to daddy, being obedient, though he's a cousin. And for some reason, Mordecai said, whatever you do, don't tell the king you're a Jew. What?
Holy Spirit told him.
Everybody hated the Jews?
There wasn't a lot of love for the Jews, historically, even to today. And again, they were this conquered people and being passed down king to king after king, the conquerors. So it's in her best interest, you think. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, as then you read, he overhears two guys, two of these eunuchs, saying, "Hey, we want to assassinate the king." And so Mordecai, he gets word to Esther, says, "Hey, you got to make this known here." The affair is investigated. These guys are hung on the gallows, and it's important that you read this. It was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. Don't forget that. I don't know if we're going to get to it today, probably next week, actually. We'll look at it 20 till. But that's important. I'll remind you when we get there. It was recorded. What Mordecai did to protect the king is recorded in the king's presence. King, this guy, there's this guy named Mordecai out there. He's the guy that overheard this and let us know when we hung him. Oh, fantastic. So that good deed was recorded, right, and credited to Mordecai. Chapter 3, first 3 verses, somebody. Oh, I didn't even tell you. You should already know this. Sorry, but you notice how many times eunuch is mentioned? Eunuch. What's a eunuch? You know what it is?
Yeah.
It's the guy who's been castrated.
Yep.
Okay? Eunuchs took care of the women.
Right.
That's what they did. So the kings would castrate men.
It's the only way they could be trusted.
They would castrate men and go, well, you're not going to impregnate any of my women. And so these castrated men were in charge of it.
Then they just go to California.
And
Question over there.
that was okay.
One more question.
One more question.
In regards to that, Scott, I just heard Tim Keller talking about that, or his podcast talking about that this morning, that it was common practice to volunteer to be castrated so that you could rise in the government.
Wow.
That was his take on it? Too much?
How many men here would volunteer to be castrated to be hired in the government? There might have been guys that did. It's Acts chapter 8, the Ethiopian eunuch, the story of that guy shows up. And I must say, a eunuch wasn't always a castrated man. The eunuchs over the harems were. It doesn't even need to be said. But the eunuch in Acts, it says he's the Ethiopian eunuch, and he's the treasurer for the queen of Ethiopia. So he's actually noble, he's nobility. And it simply says, it's saying that he's somebody with political clout, not necessarily a castrated guy. So,
Maybe that was the first transgenders.
yeah, right? Yeah. So, kind of.
Can you speak to the reproduction, the fertility, all the women that he slept with? Surely, we're talking how many kids, right? Speak to that aspect.
Sure. Well, if they were pregnant, and where the record is silent is how detailed do you want to get? Are they waiting for? Have they been tracking the women's menstrual cycles to bring the woman to the king when she's not, when she's fertile or not, when she's ovulating, right, or when she's right after her menstrual period, her cycle, so that she does not get pregnant? We're not told. I think that could be inferred. I mean, these women have been watched with a microscope. And if somebody is pregnant, then those women will be the mothers. But it wasn't uncommon for the kings in those days to have countless kids because they had countless wives and countless concubines. A concubine, again, was a second-class wife. She wasn't necessarily not taken as a wife. It was granted or assumed she was a wife of sorts because she's been with the king and nobody else is going to have her. She belongs to the king. She's his wife for pleasure. But there was, there were wives that took care of kids. I think I've talked about this somewhere in the past, but there were select women that took care of the children of the concubines and raised them. They had a system. And I think I went in depth into that some time ago. But here we go, chapter 3, first 3 verses.
Sometime later, King Xerxes promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, over all other nobles.
So this guy's second power, right? He's second in power to Xerxes. Got it? He's the vice president. Go ahead.
Making him the most powerful official in the empire. All the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show him respect whenever he passed by, for so the king had commanded. But Mordecai refused to bow down or show him respect. Then the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" They spoke to him day after day, but still he refused to comply with the order. So they spoke to Haman about this to see if he would tolerate Mordecai's conduct, since Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. Where did you want me to go to?
Go through 6.
When Haman said that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. He had learned that of Mordecai's nationality, so he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire of Xerxes.
Killing a fly with a hammer, right? Okay, so Haman comes by and he expects everybody to bow before him because the king said, hey, you treat this guy with respect, everybody bow before him. Why is Mordecai not bowing?
He bows to no one but his
He
God.
bows to nobody but God. He's Jewish, and you just got that, right? All right. Verse 4, they told Haman, well, this guy's Jewish. That's why he refuses to bow to you. Haman's infuriated. It's incredible. Verse 6, look at that. He hated the thought of wasting his fury on Mordecai only. Wow! Did you catch that? He hated the thought of wasting his fury on Mordecai only, so having been told who Mordecai's people were, Haman plotted to destroy all the Jews. All of them? Because one wouldn't bow down? Talking about this guy's a tyrant, ego trip. North Korean dictator.
Ridden by the devil.
Et cetera, okay? Branson, read verse 7 too.
So in the month of April, during the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, lots were cast in Haman's presence. The lots were called Purim, to determine the best day and month to take action, and the day selected was March 7th, nearly a year later.
Okay. So what we just saw here was that 5 years after Esther is queen, Haman's allies roll the dice to see what day of what month the Jews are going to die. Because Haman has ordered this, the king's granting it, and it was to be 11 months away on the 13th day of the month. By the way, the Festival of Purim, okay, it takes its name from the lots that they cast in Hebrew, Purim. Okay, that's why it's called Purim. So Haman casts these lots, rolls the dice to choose the 13th day of the Jewish calendar month of Adar as the date for this massacre. And here's the spoiler, it's not going to happen. All right? Verses, let's go 8 through 11.
Then Haman approached King Xerxes and said, "There is a certain race of people scattered through all the provinces of your empire. Their laws are different from those of any other nation, and they refuse to obey even the laws of the king. So it is not in the king's interest to let them live. If it pleases your majesty, issue a decree that they be destroyed, and I will give 375 tons of silver to the government administrators so they can put it into the royal treasury. The king agreed, confirming his decision by removing his signet ring from his finger and giving it to Haman, son of Hamada, the enemy of the Jews. Keep the money, the king told Haman, but go ahead and do as you like with these people.
All right, so Haman goes to Xerxes. You got this particular people scattered throughout the peoples and provinces of your kingdom. They don't keep your laws. You should have them killed, and I'll oversee the process. And Xerxes finances Haman and lets him loose to prepare for this destruction. Gives him his signet ring so that he's got the seal of the king. Anything he decides is as good as the king deciding it, and he's going to send all this stuff out. Incredible. Okay, verse 12 goes like this. Then the king's secretaries were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict according to all that Haman commanded was written to the king's satraps, to the governors over all the provinces, to the elected officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script, and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces, giving orders to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. And a copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation, calling on all the peoples to be ready for that day. Everybody in the empire, in that world at that time, everybody, start to notice where the Jews are, because on this day, you get to kill them. You get to go hunting. Everybody in the known world, in that empire. Okay? Chapter 4. It opens by telling us that when Mordecai hears about this, he falls apart. And he goes throughout the city. He's just wailing, and he's probably thinking to himself, why didn't I just bow to Haman? Imagine if you're Haman, you're Mordecai, thinking what you're thinking, you just caused this. Yeah. Oh my gosh, maybe I was stubborn, I was prideful, I should have bowed to this guy. What's the deal? Why in the world would I do this? Verse 3, I'll just read the whole thing. So chapter 4, here we go. When Mordecai learned all that he had done, that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes. He went through the city wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. So all the Jews, now they know about this thing. I mean, imagine if somebody was in charge of, let's say not just the United States, but I just want you to imagine how many other countries. And sends this, supposed decree that it's going to be open season on Christians, X amount of months from now. Go buy your ammo, get ready. What are the Jews doing? Or what would the Christians be doing? What would we be doing?
Get ready.
Depend who you are. Some of you'd be arming up. I know some of you'd be arming up. But a lot of Christians would be going,
Oh my God.
they're going to pack and escape, try to run away, hide at night, but they're going to be hunted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And anywhere they go, people are looking. Have you ever heard of anything like this ever ordered in the history of the world? But guess what? It will be happening again.
Yeah.
This is the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
It's chapter 13. All Christians will be hunted.
And those who were mourning openly identified themselves.
Oh.
So now they're not even hidden.
Right. Oh gosh, right. Well, now, what's interesting though is the Jews have been given really almost a year to prepare. And I wonder how many of them began to pack and they attempt to flee to another country. But what country do they go to? Because Xerxes ruled over their world. Where do they go?
America.
There's no planes, America. There's no planes. Right? Okay.
They wandered to Germany.
They wandered to Germany. Now, remember, Mordecai had told Esther back in chapter 2 not to reveal to the king or anybody that she was Jewish, because Jews were conquered and ostracized people. Verse 4 says Esther heard about the decree, heard about Mordecai's state of distress, and she sends one of her eunuchs to go to Mordecai to learn what was happening and why. When Esther's maids and her eunuchs came and told her the queen was deeply distressed, she sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. The eunuch's going to go back and forth carrying messages between Esther and Mordecai. Somebody read 5 through 8.
Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai, to learn what and why this was. So he went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. He then gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, and he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go into the king and make supplication to him and plead before him for her people.
Keep going.
Okay. So Hathach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court of the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and I will go to the king, which is against the law, and I will perish. I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded.
Okay, so if you caught that, this eunuch is going back and forth between Esther and Mordecai, carrying messages. Mordecai tells her, this is Haman's idea, and charges her, you're going to implore the king on behalf of your people. And she writes back, she'll be put to death if she approaches the king without being invited. Because that is how it was, not just here in Persia. This is what it was in the ancient world. You don't just walk up to the king and have a conversation. It doesn't matter who you are, even if you're his wife. The king has to summon you, otherwise you'll lose your head. Very interesting. You're just not allowed to approach the king like that. And so, verse 11, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside or out, inside the inner court without being called, there's but one law. All will likely be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to somebody, the person live. So it's as if he sits there and he's got the scepter, and if he kind of leans it out to you like that, that's your permission to approach the throne. You may approach the throne. Okay? And she goes, I haven't been summoned to the king. I haven't seen him for 30 days. I'm his wife, and he hasn't even asked for me for 30 days. When they told Mordecai what Esther said, what did Mordecai send back? Did you catch that? Don't think that in the king's palace you'll escape any more than all the other Jews. You don't think you're safe because you're the queen and you're there. Okay? For if you keep silence at such a time as this, boy, this is a word for the Christians in America.
Yeah.
relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter. Now, that's a lot of faith there. He's believing God is going to bring protection. God will raise up somebody, something, some movement that will bring deliverance for the Jews from somewhere. But you and your father's family will perish. He knows your mom and dad. He's going to kill your whole family. Who knows? And then, my gosh, how often do we quote this? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this. You know, we quote that a lot.
You know?
And you think about where you're at for such a time as this. And maybe you've identified that in your own life. God does something with you for such a time as this. It just means all of a sudden you just are aware you are at the right place at the right time. Huh. God put me right here, whatever, to do this thing right now for such a time as this. Then Esther says, go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, in the capital. Get all the Jews you can right there. And hold a fast on my behalf. On my behalf. I want all the Jews there at the capital to not eat or drink. No nothing. For 3 days, night or day. We're going to fast too, me and my mates. After that, I'll go to the king. Right? Though it's against the law. If I perish, she says. And Mordecai went away and did everything Esther had ordered him. So, he's been telling her what to do, and now she's in a place where she really needs to have him do something. And what is it? What is she asking him for? Intercessory prayer. She is saying, oh my gosh, I need to talk. I mean, she knows she's in proximity to the king. She knows she can have an audience with the guy. You can imagine she realizes, well, I'm a Jew. Somehow I'm going to let them know I'm one, even though they want to hunt me down. I mean, how is this going to work? And it's amazing. Because next week, I can't wait until we continue through. This is one of the most exciting stories in the scriptures.
Yeah.
This is actually the first moment God is recognized in this book.
In the Book of Esther.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And it's wonderful. The storyline, the way it's written, it's amazing. I mean, it is a beautiful story. Right? But,
That's the moment she claims her identity.
yeah. It's going to be amazing. She'll reveal who she is. And she's just brilliant. And clearly, as the people are praying and fasting, they're asking God, I mean, how would you pray and fast on her behalf? If we knew, our woman, our man, whatever is right there as VP, and we know it, I'm going to guess how many Jews knew Esther was a Jew? Hey, she's one of us. Wow, look where she's at. But, I think they probably knew it's got to stay kind of quiet. But here they are. It's like, no time to be silent anymore. And they might as well pray and fast, which they do. And they're interceding, God, would you somehow make a way for the king to ask Esther come into his palace, and some conversation happens, and somehow Esther knows the things to say. Somehow she is able to approach this topic and talk about Haman and this thing and reveal she's a Jew and kind of like, if you love me, I mean, I'm Jewish. You really want to, because they'll snuff me out too. I'm your queen. Can I speak on behalf of my people? I mean, how would you be praying? All right. So we'll find out the exciting conclusion, maybe finish it up next week, but we'll take maybe 1 or 2 more weeks to go through. Craig?
I'm just reminded that by this story, how many times God has done something very similar to this.
Right?
Starting with Jacob, or Joseph, the son of Jacob, the son of Israel, who was put in a pit only to be taken to Egypt, eventually become
Vice Pharaoh,
because he was able to interpret the dream.
It's amazing. Saves some people.
And saved Israel.
Saves some people.
Because he came. And then, what about Moses?
Yeah.
Look at saved by an Egyptian, raised to prominence to save the nation.
Do you think he still does that?
Amazing
Yes.
stories.
Here's Esther, and then you got Joshua, you
Yeah.
got David, and
Right?
the whole line.
Right? So powerful. Right? So powerful. Okay. We'll close there. Thanks for coming out again tonight. Maybe think about where you're at, and what call is on your life, and why you are where you are at this moment. And is there something maybe you've yet to do that you know you need to do? Why are you where you are? And watch out for your ego, because that'll get in the way. Your flesh can, self-aggrandizement. I mean, you can think too much of yourself. Oh, I'm called to whatever. And just humbly ask God, am I supposed to do something? Am I in a certain spot? Is this the time? And it may not be now. It may be. Who knows? But God, and He'll tell you. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
We'll pray and we'll get out here. Tony, would you pray for us tonight?
Heavenly Father, I am just so humbled that you loved humanity, your creation, so much that you provided a way for us to come into your presence, not only come into your presence, but to have a relationship with you through your Son, Jesus. As we receive the gift of salvation and as we submit ourselves to the leading of the Holy Spirit. Wow. So much love. And Lord, be with us as we go forward the rest of this week. Be with us in our studies and in our prayers. Be with us in our hurts and in our healings, Lord. Be with us as we seek you more and more. And we thank you for this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, brother. Thanks, everybody.